All right, so as I was mentioning before we prayed, we're going to try to, I doubt we'll wrap up Job today, but probably within the next couple weeks we'll wrap it up. And we're in the section of Job 38 through 41 where God is speaking to Job. We got into 40 just a little bit. We're going to pick up and read 40 and then go from there. So let's go ahead and if one of you guys back there wants to read chapter 40.
The Lord said to Job, "Will the one who contends with the Almighty God correct him? Let him accuse his God, answer him." Then Job answered the Lord, "Am I unworthy? How can I reply to you? I put my hand over my mouth. I spoke once, but I have no answer. Twice, but I will say no more." Then the Lord spoke to Job out of the storm. "Brace yourself like a man. I will question you. Would you discredit my justice? Would you condemn my justice yourself? Do you have an arm like God's? Can you carry your voice like thunder, like his? Then adorn yourself with glory and splendor, and clothe yourself with honor and majesty. Unleash the fury of your wrath. Look at all who are proud and bring them low. Look at all them who are proud and humble them. Crush the wicked where they stand. Bury them in the dust together. Shroud their face in the grave. Then I myself will admit to you that I own right hand can save you."
All right, hold up right there, DP. All right, so I think we had covered this section toward the end of a couple weeks ago. But just to reiterate, in chapter 40, God continues to emphasize how little Job knows and how little power he has by asking more questions about his creation. As we mentioned, God will focus on two large creatures as an example of his power and how little Job knows about things. And so Behemoth we'll talk about here at the end of chapter 40, and then Leviathan in chapter 41. In the first part here, God asked Job if he wants to continue on with the trial that Job had requested, so to speak. Job had wanted the opportunity to present his case before God back in one of the places where he was speaking. And he was saying that God had treated him unfairly, mistreated him. But at this point, Job pretty much says, what can I say, right? And so, I think he realizes at this point his place, but he doesn't want to go any further in speaking, I don't think. So God then, since Job doesn't say anything, God asks him some more questions, and he asks Job if he's going to discredit God's judgment. Because Job had, in effect, argued that he was more just than God because he was saying God was treating him unfairly. So if you remember, that was what made Elihu so angry. And Elihu was right to contend with that line of thought, but Elihu didn't do it in the right way. If you remember, he was pretty belligerent and was also wrong in the way he was coming from. But I think he was correct in saying that Job was incorrect when he was claiming that God was treating him unfairly and the way that he was saying it. So God asked Job if he has a voice like God's voice. And I think that's pretty, as I mentioned, I think that's a pretty illustrative, like they would have really known what that meant because they were listening to God. Like God was saying this, right? So it would have been like, do you have a voice like mine? Can you imagine that? But just imagine if you were hearing that out of a storm or a whirlwind. So God suggests that if Job is so just, he should be able to do a better job of running the universe than God can, in effect. That's what he says. And he says that Job should be able to execute justice against the wicked and do a perfect job in that. So if Job could be perfect in judging everybody around him, then he could claim to be great. But of course, God's emphasizing that you can't do that. I mean, no person can judge everything perfectly. We don't know the thoughts of other people, right? We can't judge motives. We can't judge what people are thinking. So it's inherent in what he's saying that it doesn't work, that we can't be greater than God. So I think that's pretty much what we had discussed in chapter 40, and we were just getting ready to go into Behemoth and discuss God's description of the behemoth. So if one of you guys wants to read 15, actually, and before we do that, did you guys get that slide that I sent this morning? You want to put that up real quick? Now this is actually going back. Remember we talked about what some people, in one translation is called a unicorn. In another translation, it's a wild ox, or I forget exactly what it's called. Now then, I don't know if you guys know David Attenborough, who he is. He, I think, is the narrator for Planet Earth, maybe. I don't think I probably agree with a lot of the stuff that he says. And in fact, on this slide, you can see 39,000 years. I don't necessarily agree with that timeline. But I thought this was an interesting representation of what that unicorn might have looked like and why God's comparing it to a domesticated ox. We talked about the comparison that's made there. You can imagine trying to control that thing while you're farming or doing a plow versus what a regular ox, a normal ox would be. So anyway, I found that on, I think that was on Facebook. They probably heard me talk about Job, and that's probably why that came up. I don't know, on my phone. But anyway, I saw that, and I thought that was an interesting picture. So anyway, just to show the difference of what God was talking about there between that. And then now we're going to get into another creature who's even more larger, more grand than that. So let's go back over to Job 40, beginning in verse 15, down through the end of the chapter.
Look at Behemoth, which I made along with you, and which feeds on grass like an ox. What strength it has in its loins, what power in its muscles of its belly. Its tail sways like a cedar. Its tail sways like a cedar. The sinews of its thighs are close knit. Its bones are tubes of bronze. Its limbs are rods of iron. It ranks among them, it ranks first among the works of God. Yet its maker can approach it with its sword. The hills bring in their produce, and the wild animals play nearby. Under the lotus tree it lies, hidden among the reeds in the marsh. The lotus is concealed in their shadow. The poplars by the stream surround it. The raging river does not alarm it. It is secure, though the Jordan should surge against its mouth. Can anyone capture it by the eyes, or trap it and pierce its nose?
All right, so God now turns to a description of a large, powerful animal called Behemoth to emphasize his power. He emphasizes that he created the behemoth just like he created humans. So putting Job in the same category as a creation of God. The word behemoth here, I think, is in the plural, but in chapter 40, it's used with singular verbs and pronouns. So that's why they, I think, translate it to mean great beast. Now, back when the book that I've been using, I think I showed you guys, Wayne Jackson's book, in the 80s, back when this was written, and when I was a kid, I remember there being a large debate around what this animal was. Here God says, Behemoth is an animal that eats grass like an ox. It's extremely strong, with a tail like a cedar tree, skeleton like a framework of brass and iron, chief in size and might of all of God's creation. So it sounds like it eats a lot of plants, but other animals are able to roam close by it without fear. It sounds like it was either tall enough to walk on the bottom of the river and still have its head above water, or swim against the tide, or maybe even go underwater. I don't know. It sounds like it's a large, powerful beast that can go in the water in some manner with the way the description is. So what does that description sound like to you?
Nothing we currently have.
Nothing we currently have on the planet. Now, I heard somebody say dinosaur, right? It sounds like a dinosaur, right? What kind of a dinosaur specifically does it sound like?
Brontosaurus.
Like a brontosaurus, what we would know as a brontosaurus. Now, you can get into all kinds of discussions when it comes to dinosaurs. I don't know how many of the skeletons that are put together are actually real versus how many are just kind of sketched together. I don't know what they actually looked like or any, there's a lot of assumptions made and things put together like nobody really knows because none of us has actually seen one because they're not here any longer. So there's a lot of stuff you can get into, but the main thing here is that it's something that we don't have today, but it was there then, because would it have made sense for God to have been describing an animal that Job didn't know as proof of his power? Like, no, it wouldn't have made any sense. So we know it was there. Now, why was it that people would argue that it wasn't a dinosaur or not want to believe it was a dinosaur? What reason would that be the case?
Well, there are several reasons. One, it's not here. If I can paraquote, if you will, Tolkien, what was history became legend and became myth.
Became myth,
and
right.
Things that should not have been forgotten have been forgotten. So you have that, add that to the quote-unquote science involved in dating animals. It is a contention among science because of evolution that we could not possibly have existed with them, even though there's overwhelming evidence that we did.
Correct, right. So it's really evolutionary theory is the reason that people have a problem with that, right? Because what is it? They even, I think, like the Jurassic movies, what was one of the complaints about them? Well, the dinosaurs that they show in that movie aren't even from the Jurassic period, right? The Jurassic period is like 65 million years ago or something like that, and then the dinosaurs they're showing, some of them are supposedly from 120 million years ago, or, so you're talking all these millions of years and those, and so how is it possible if in the evolutionary track or in the dating that they have of all these skeletons and all that stuff that people were together with them? But as you mentioned, on the flip side of that, there's all this evidence of, well, they did exist together, footprints side by side, right? And if you believe in God, now this is where you're not, people don't come from that viewpoint that are having this struggle. But if you do, that God's describing an animal that had to have been present, because what good would it have done to describe it if it wasn't proving his point? Like if it's like, well, I don't know what behemoth is. What's he describing? So that would have been a problem. Now, some of the animals that have been proposed as possibilities would be, some have suggested an elephant or a hippopotamus, or a woolly mammoth type thing, but none of those fit the description because of one major thing. You got that tail like a cedar, and none of those animals would fit the tail like a cedar, even if you try to push the other stuff into fitting. I don't think you can get around that whenever you get to that. So, there's an article that I read by a writer named Alan Steele. I think he's probably maybe connected with Answers in Genesis. He says, consequently, the most reasonable interpretation is that behemoth was a large animal, now extinct, which had a large tail. Thus, some type of extinct dinosaur should still be considered a perfectly reasonable possibility according to our present state of knowledge. He also discusses how some people have put forward that the animal is just a mythological creature, But the descriptions of both behemoth and leviathan seem to indicate that people knew these animals, and they do not fit with mythological creatures. Plus, it would totally contradict the point God is making if he were to use mythological creatures as an example of his creation. So, yeah, you got to just think through what we're just talking about here. What we're talking about is a large animal that we don't have present with us anymore, but was present at the time that God was speaking to Job and his friends here. You know, on the other side of evolution, just people who don't want to believe in God would support that theory, and that would be why they might have trouble with this. But also, Christians, I think, you know, because of the geological record as it's presented to us, and these things struggle with it as well, you know, they become set on trying to figure out an animal that is more commonly known to have lived with people because they didn't want it referring to a dinosaur because of all the stuff around it, you know, that, well, people couldn't have ever lived with dinosaurs. You know, that was kind of the thinking. But I think, like I said, the simplest explanation, and what seems to be the case here, is just that you're dealing with a dinosaur, is extinct now, and I don't think it's any further than that. Once again, you could get into all kinds of discussions about what happened to them, why aren't they here, but we know lots of animals that are extinct now, right? And they also discover some that they think were extinct that end up not being extinct. So, you know, it's just, that's the way it is. But I don't think that we should try to push this into being some animal that still exists today that when it doesn't work, when it doesn't fit. So I think that's where we need to be careful about it. You were smiling. Did you have something on that? No. You were just laughing at what I was saying.
Think of an animal today that exists that we can't somehow control. So thinking of an animal that's existing.
Right. There's nothing that fits into this at all. I mean, when you think about an elephant, or I guess a hippo, you can't really control very well. But
actually, they can. They can domesticate hippos. In fact, I just watched something this past week about somebody who has a domesticated hippo that lives and actually comes to eat dinner in the house.
Wow. So, yeah, I hadn't seen that, but yeah, I mean, but wait, at the same time, when you think about it, I mean, it just doesn't fit the description at all. Now, one interesting thing is people always think of hippos as those gentle creatures or whatever. They're not. It does meet the description of something that would be powerful and scary, but it doesn't. It doesn't fit the description, the physical characteristics that we're looking at. It is. I think it is, right? I mean, I think more people die from hippo attacks than anything, because they're very territorial, and if you're in the water, you're in trouble.
And they will eat alligators.
Yeah. So yeah. All right. So anyway, anybody have any other comments on that or questions? All right. Let's go on to 41 then. And you guys, this is 34 verses. I want to read them all at the same time because it's all one big description. If you want to split it, you're welcome to, or one of you can just read it all the way through.
Can you put Leviathan in a fish hook, or tie it down, or tie its tongue with a rope? Can you put a cord through its nose, or pierce its jaw with a hook? Will it keep begging you for mercy? Will it speak to you from gentle words? Will it make an agreement with you? For you take it as your slave for life. Can you make it a pet of it like a bird, or on a leash for the young woman in your house, or traders barter for it? Will they divide it up among the merchants? Can you hide it with harpoons, or head with spitching fears? Can you lay a hand on it? Will you remember the struggle and never do it again? Any hope of subduing its false and mere sight of its overpowering. No one is fierce enough to rouse it. Who is able to stand up against me? Who has claimed against me that it must pay? Everything under heaven belongs to me. I will not fail to speak of Leviathan's limbs, its strength and perfect form, the graceful form. Who can strip off its outer coat? Who can penetrate its coat of armor? Who dares open the door of its mouth, ring around the fearsome teeth? Its back has rows of shields, tightly sealed together, each so close the next no air can pass between it. They are joined faster to one another. They cling together and cannot be parted. Its snorting throws flashes of light. It's sorry. Its eyes are like the rays of dawn, flames streaming from its mouth. Sparks of fire shoot out. Smoke pours from its nostrils, as far a boiling pot of burning reeds. Its breath sets coals ablaze, and flames darts from its mouth. Strength resides from its neck. Dismay goes before it. The folds of its flesh are tightly joined. They are firmly immovable. Its chest is hard as rock, hard as a lower millstone. When it rises up, the mighty are terrified. They retreat before its thrashing. The sword then reaches it and has no effect, nor the spear the dart of the javelin. Iron treats it like straw, and bronze like rotten wood. Arrows do not make it flee. Sling stones are like a chaff to it. The club seems but a piece of straw. It laughs at the rattling of the lance. It undersides the jogging potsherds, leaving the trail of mud like thrashing sledge. It makes depths churn like boiling cauldron, and stirs up the sea like a pot of ointment. It leaves a glistening wake behind it. One would think it had white hair. Nothing on earth is its equal, a creature without fear. It looks down on the haughty. It's king over all. All are you that are proud.
Got to go back on here. So chapter 41, God starts with in a description of another creature, Leviathan. And again, this illustration is meant to emphasize the wisdom and power of the Creator in dramatic contrast to the ignorance and weakness of the created. And it's especially brought out in verses 10 and 11, where God points out that if people aren't able to battle and defeat the Leviathan, which is a creation, how can they stand before him and win an argument against him, basically, is, I think, implicit. He asked Job and the others present who can give something to him when everything is his. And I think that's a pretty profound statement and something to really think about. The realization that everything we have actually belongs to God should shape the way we view our lives and the world and our general attitude in life. Everything belongs to God. And so, that's something that that should have an impact on the way we view things. Leviathan is a creature, I shouldn't say is a creature. Leviathan is also mentioned in other passages, at least the term Leviathan is. If you go back to Job 3:8, Job had mentioned it. Let those curse it who curse the day, who are prepared to rouse Leviathan. You go to Psalm 74 and 14. Thou didst crush the heads of Leviathan. Thou didst give him as food for the creatures of the wilderness. Psalm 104:26. There the ships move along, and Leviathan, which thou hast formed to sport in it. Actually, go back to 25, he's referring to the sea there. There is the sea, great and broad, in which are swarms without number, animals, both great and small and great. There the ships move along, and Leviathan, which thou hast formed to sport in it. And all those passages kind of seem to be referring to the creature, the animal that lives in the sea. I think Isaiah 27:1 may have a little bit of a different connotation with it. 27:1, in that day the Lord will punish Leviathan, the fleeing serpent, with his fierce and great mighty sword. even Leviathan, the twisted serpent, and he will kill the dragon who lives in the sea. It still there again meets the description, but seems to maybe have more of a reference to Satan, the devil. And we get that in Revelation too, whenever he starts talking about the dragon and the Satan. Here, for sure, God is describing a creature that, once again, Job is familiar with. And that's always critical, because there's no reason for God to be describing some mythological creature that doesn't exist as evidence of his power. The animal, of course, based on the description, lives in water, or at least can, once again, go in the water. I don't guess it necessarily says lives in the water. But couple that with some of the other scriptures that we read, seems to be in the ocean. The description indicates that that it's the greatest creature that God created. The same issue here arises with Leviathan as we saw with Behemoth. But once again, let's ask, what animal do you think this sounds like?
Fire-breathing dragon.
A fire-breathing dragon, yeah. That's what I would say.
Funny thing is, that description of it as like a snake is cross-cultural. So we have images from ancient China to South America to North America of a fire-breathing like snake.
Right, the general shape is, though you see different versions of it, the general shape of a dragon is typically long tail, long neck, some kind of wings in the middle, and body. So yeah, they're all similar. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that too here in a minute. But here again, some people trying to make it work with animals we know have suggested a whale, a shark, or a crocodile.
I don't know of any of them that breathe fire.
Yeah, well, and the shark and the whale wouldn't be able to breathe fire very well, I wouldn't think, because they don't come out of the water. So the only one that possibly could fit would be the crocodile. We'll talk a little bit about that. In that, just like the picture I showed of that unicorn, there could be an extinct crocodile, or something similar to a crocodile that could be referring to. But certainly not one that we see today at all, right? And the reason that I say that the crocodile, that it could be some kind of an extinct species of crocodile, there's a couple of things that are always interesting. And those of you, I'm not, like I said, I know a little bit about science and I do some research, but I'm not a scientist or anything like that. So if you know anything different than what I'm saying or want to add to it, that's fine. But if I'm not mistaken, I think reptiles grow their entire lives. Now then the rate of growth slows as they age, but I believe that they continue growing. If that's correct, and it's a big if, so once again, this argument isn't any real important to the discussion, but it's just interesting to me. If it is true that they grow their entire lives, and people live to be, how long did people live to be? What, 900 and some years old we got?
969.
Yeah, 969. So if you take a crocodile that today we know lived to be pretty old, I think 100 years old or whatever, and you take one that is 1,500 years old, project that out. If they never stop growing, how big is that creature going to be? Of course, once again, rate of growth is going to slow and all that, but it's still going to be pretty massive, right? I mean, you're going to get a massive, anybody ever see what was it, Lake Placid or whatever, some of those where they make the crocodiles, how big they are and all that. But we already have big, large crocodiles, and they do meet some of this description. They match with some of this description. So a type of crocodile could be, in the crocodilian family or whatever, could be what you're talking about. But no matter what, like we said, sounds like a dragon, right?
Sounds like Godzilla, actually.
Godzilla. Well, where'd Godzilla come from? Where'd the thought for Godzilla come from? Some people struggle with the verse that talks about Leviathan breathing fire. Maybe some try to say that maybe it's referring to splashing of water as the crocodile makes a certain movement or as the animal goes through the ocean or water. But here again, there's no reason to think that there couldn't be a fire-breathing animal. There is today. There's a beetle, the bombardier beetle, that can eject a hot chemical spray. It may not look like fire, but it can burn you. It's a combination of hydrogen peroxide and hydroquinone or something like that. Anyway, a couple chemicals brought together that it can I don't know if you call it spit or whatever at its attackers. So there's things that we see that show that it could be done, that it's certainly there. Also, according to history, there are texts like the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle in the year 793 AD talks about. I have a little text here where it talks about what's it say? The year 793. Here there were dreadful forewarnings come over the land of Northumbria, and woefully terrified the people. These were amazing sheets of lightning and whirlwinds and fiery dragons seen flying in the sky. Now, I don't know how much of that's embellishment or what's real or what, but this is not a fictional piece of literature. This is something from history where they're talking about these things, and it destroyed God's church in Lindisfarne Island. And Sitka died on the 8th day before the Calends of March. So I guess it killed him. I don't know. But anyway, we do have historical records of these kind of beasts.
Well, we have a lot of historical records going over thousands of years.
Right. Yeah. Like you said, going back to China. And that's interesting. It's another interesting thing. Like the what's it called? I had it this morning. I didn't write it in my notes, so I can't remember. What's the Chinese calendar? The year. Where you have the year of the tiger, the year of the monkey.
The year of the rabbit, isn't it?
I don't know what the year is this year, but anyway, there's a year of the dragon, right? Are any of the other things in this calendar fictional?
Nope.
No. So why would we assume that the dragon's fictional?
I don't.
There's
way too much history.
Yeah. So anyway, we may not know exactly what the dragons looked like or anything, but once again, to assume that God is describing a mythical creature or try to fit it into some animal that we see today doesn't work. So I think the most logical conclusion is that it's some large creature that had these characteristics that emphasize, that shows what God created and that Job understood what was being said to him. One other thing that I wanted to bring up here as we kind of conclude what God had to say, and I brought it up before, I think, is that people can be creative. There's certainly, people who are more analytical and people who are more creative, and you got your artists and those kind of things, and people who don't do, I definitely don't qualify as in the artist area. I'm more the analytical side. But, so there are people that are more creative and they can come up with things that, like, I can't think of or think up. However, nobody ever creates something from nothing. So the images that we have of a lot of these things came from somewhere. At least there was some animal with some of the characteristics of what we call a dragon today. Some of the mythology around it came from somewhere. As an example of this, you guys know that I like movies, science fiction. Everything seen in science fiction comes from something. Now, it may not be something that you or I would put together and come up with, but it comes from something. Often fictional creatures in TV shows and movies are combinations of various strange animals or things from nature. As an example, how many of you are familiar with the Alien series of movies? You know, and I won't get into it because there's some pretty disgusting stuff in Alien and Aliens, but the various stages of the alien creature are based on things from Earth. And the writers, the person who came up with it kind of tells you what they use. You know, like, you know, the face hugger was based on the bones in the human hand and with some other features added to it. The way the alien grows and reproduces is taken from the life cycle of insects, specifically the wasp family. I can't even say the name of the wasp. Ichneumonidae, wasp family. You know, the surrealist drawings of the full-grown creature came from putting various parts of insects and vertebrates and fossils together. So all of these things that we like, wow, I've never seen anything like that before. Well, it came from somewhere still. You know the verse in Proverbs, there's nothing new under this, or I guess that's Ecclesiastes. There's nothing new under the sun. Like, there are new things to us, but we don't get something from nothing. It comes from somewhere. So anyway, I just wanted to bring that point up because sometimes we might think, well, you know, where did this come from, or it just got made up or whatever. It came from somewhere. Like, we see these things. So going back to how that relates to here, I think the descriptions of Behemoth and Leviathan came from real animals. And just once again to emphasize that we're not dealing with fictional creatures or anything like that. Okay, anybody have any comments on Leviathan or questions or anything before we go to wrap up?
When will they find one that isn't extinct yet?
Well, it's possible if it's in the ocean, right?
It's a big ocean.
Yep. Okay, so just a quick review back to the section of dealing with what God said. What is unique about the things that are said here in chapters 38 through 41? Who's doing the talking? God is. So God, like I emphasized, God's doing the speaking. So not that some of the things that we talked about, not that he's showing how much, like he doesn't go into detail like, oh, we can prove, he knew, he doesn't tell us, well, this is how I created the earth with these exact dimensions or whatever. But if he had said anything that would have been incorrect in here, that would have been from false beliefs of the day, that would have shown that we have a problem, right? But as long as there's nothing in here that's incorrect, it's not that he had to go into the detail to try to explain it all to us to prove it, but the fact that that nothing was said that was incorrect, that is said in a very succinct manner and a very, it's a very pointed discussion, tells us a lot, I think. And as I said, I don't think there's anything. Now, people may claim that they found things that show, well, the Bible's wrong or incorrect or whatever, but I'm not aware of anything that's been found that would show that. So it's important, like we said, other parts of the Bible, there are things said that are incorrect, not from an incorrect, like, oh, it didn't happen that way, but from the people who are saying it are incorrect in what they're saying because they have the wrong view of things or the wrong ideas. But here, there can't be anything found that's wrong, that's incorrect from a science perspective or any other perspective, because it's God speaking, and that can't be the case. All right, what two facts were God's questions to Job designed to emphasize?
One, that Job doesn't know nearly as much as he thought he did. Secondly, that God's power is overwhelming and God is in control.
Right. And along with that, God is the dictator of morality. Like he's not just emphasizing creation and power over creation, but also that he dictates morality. Now, and then that's a whole nother discussion that you can get into. We've mentioned before C.S. Lewis and how morality can be used as a way of showing that there is a creator, because people have a sense of morality, inherent, and we know that. But I don't want to go down that road too much, but morality is also a big part in this. And why was that such a big deal? Well, because Job, in effect, had questioned that to some degree, because he was saying, I'm being treated unfairly. So that's why that's important. So yeah, God's questions show how little we know, and as I mentioned a couple weeks ago, how little we still know. Even though we think we know so much more than what they knew, we still don't know much when it comes to the universe. And then, of course, that he established the moral code by which we live, and we always need to take that into consideration whenever we're questioning God. And when, and as we mentioned throughout this series of studies, it's hard sometimes when we're struggling, when we're suffering, when we don't understand why something's happening, to remember that. That's not something that's easy, but it's
also important to point out here, God's not condemning him for asking.
right.
God's challenging him because he challenged God.
Which is why it's so important how we do that. Like, are we challenging or are we searching? Are we seeking? What's our attitude? Because we need to realize our place compared to what, in the universe, compared to what God is. All right, we got just a couple minutes. We'll finish up these questions here. And then next week we'll try to finish up the whole study. Is there really a conflict between the teaching of the Bible and science?
No. There's only a conflict between people's interpretation of the science and the Bible.
And even further than that, I would argue that some of what is considered science that was developed in order to try to take God out of it. Like, it actually had a pointed purpose. Like, they're trying to prove their theory without any real facts or anything real basis for it. And as I mentioned, because when you're talking these numbers where they just keep throwing out, just like with the global warming stuff and everything, where they're throwing out, oh, it's 20 years from now. Now it's 100 years from now. Now it's 500 years from now. And they have to keep increasing the size of their sample because why? Because it doesn't happen the way that their models project or what they're thinking. Where did they come up with these things? I mean, who came up with 120 million years or whatever? I mean, like,
They make stuff up as they go along.
yeah, I mean, they don't know more than we know. They may have studied more, but they don't have anything more than observation for that. So I think that's, there again, don't accept the premise of some of the stuff.
Today's weather, right?
Right, exactly, yeah. Yeah, we can't, we talked about the weather before, like the weather patterns, they don't, whenever they can forecast a day perfect, we're much better at it than we used to be, but when they can get it perfect, then we'll talk. All right, what is the only source of knowledge about the origin of the earth?
God.
Somebody who was there, right? So yeah, God, because God tells us in his word. Otherwise, you can't, nobody knows without that source. And then finally, why did God talk about the behemoth and Leviathan when Job refused to say anything?
Because they are awesome creatures that even Job is afraid of.
To emphasize his point, right? Yeah, those 2 points that we were talking about, really the one in this case, God's the creator and his power and knowledge compared to us is infinite. Like we can't even get there at all. So
We got trouble getting out of bed in the morning.
so yeah, we just cannot fathom God's power and strength. And that's really the emphasis that he's making. And once again, I think he's using real animals because it doesn't make sense for him to be using mythological creatures to emphasize that. All right, so that's it for today. We'll pick up with chapter 42 and finish up Job next week, hopefully. And we'll be back for worship in just a few minutes. Thanks.